Vladimir Putin's war on Ukraine keeps spilling over into Russian territory. Officials in Russia now blaming Ukraine for drone attacks and shelling in several regions today. And that includes the map there you can see highlight Belgorod. That is near, as you can see, near the border. Attacks appear to be on the rise there ever since a group of Russian nationals aligned with Ukraine claimed to have launched an assault on their own country. That's a little more than a week ago. Ukraine has largely stayed quiet about these attacks without claiming direct responsibility. But a top aide to Ukraine's president says the gates of war have opened on Russian territory. Let's go straight to CNN's Sam Kiley in Kharkiv. And Sam, yesterday on the show, you told me that with these cross-borders attacks, which are now becoming, I think it's fair to say, more systematic, we could be seeing a new phase in this war. What could this potentially mean? What risks do you see here, Sam?
Well, I think the risks, as assessed by none other than Vladimir Putin, are really pretty high. And they're exactly the results, in terms of the Ukrainian perspective, that they would want to see, which is reaction from the Kremlin, in which Vladimir Putin has to go onto state TV and at a conference tell his people not to worry, that it's incumbent on the government to steady the ship. This is what he said.
Today, we will deal with the same issues in relation to ensuring the security of Russia, in this case, domestic political security, taking into account the efforts that our ill-wishers are still making and intensifying in order to stir up the situation inside Russia.
Now, stirring up the situation inside Russia is precisely the agenda of this two groups of Russian dissidents that are backed by Ukraine, armed by Ukraine, and traveling in Ukrainian-supplied vehicles. They do also have their own funding streams, they say. And, of course, the ongoing attacks that we've seen in terms of the drone attack. Since we spoke yesterday, there's been another drone attack on the town of Smolensk, in Smolensk province, quite a long way north of the Ukrainian border. And on top of that, the attacks continue in Belgorod, with the governor there saying that 2,500 people have now been evacuated from villages around, and he was going on a live stream to try to reassure his population. And in watching that live stream, you saw a little bit potentially of why this is also a cyber campaign, with a lot of bogus and rather bizarre questions being asked him, clearly by people trying to undermine his ability to steady the nerves of the Russian people close to the border with Ukraine. Lisa?
Let me ask you this. I mean, I've seen reports today, I know you're coming out of eastern Ukraine, and coming from the Russians here, Sam, about an assault by Chechen units. Is this one of those stories you're going to tell me that we need to be wary of?
Well, the Russians and I think the Ukrainians agree that Chechen special forces have been moved into the battle space not far from Bakhmut. Bakhmut has been, there's supposed to be a relief in place going on more or less now, or concluding more or less now, between the Wagner mercenary group and the regular Russian forces. There are also, again, unverifiable reports coming out of Belgorod that perhaps Russian special forces have been moved there. The suggestion being made by Ukrainians is that they've been moved from the theatre in the east. But again, you're right, Isa, we should take anything the Ukrainians say about what the Russians are up to, unless they have direct proof, with a bit of a pinch of salt.
Indeed. Sam Kiley, thank you very much. Sam Kiley joining us this evening from Kharkiv. Well, Ukraine's military is accusing Russia of carrying out dozens of airstrikes in the last 24 hours. Moscow has been targeting the Ukrainian capital relentlessly, in fact, in recent weeks. Video on social media shows what's become common in Kyiv. People, like you can see there, seeking safety inside a subway station. 2 people were injured overnight by falling debris. Well, this comes a day after 3 people, if you remember, were killed by debris during a Russian attack. They had tried to enter a bomb shelter, but it was locked. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky now says, quote, very specific individuals will be held responsible. Let's get more on all of this. Joining me now is Alina Frolova, Deputy Chairperson of the Center for Defense Strategies and a former Deputy Minister of Defense in Ukraine. Alina, great to have you back on the show. Let me start off with the discussion that I was having with our correspondent Sam Kiley in eastern Ukraine. what we have been seeing is an increase in these cross-border incursions and attacks on Belgorod and beyond. The official line, I believe, from Ukraine is that it's not directly involved. So how is it involved?
Well, it is really not involved. There is no any kind of official connection or something like this. And obviously, we do understand that all these interventions, they are playing well for Ukrainian purpose in any case, because first of all, they take the part of attention, then potentially some troops, Russian troops, can be relocated to the border regions to keep the border and not to go on the front line. And of course, in case of successful operations for them to go in deeper into Russian territory, it can be some kind of demilitarized zone for Ukraine, where we can have the released like less ammunition, less artillery shelling, and so on. So it's obviously a place for Ukraine, but that's only Russian citizens who are taking this. They officially announced this. They officially demonstrating their faces and relation to Russia. So we cannot say about some kind of interconnection with Ukrainian authorities.
Right, so let me ask you this, because our correspondent that we just had at the top of the show, Sam Kiley, he spoke to some of these men taking part in these incursions. They're anti-Putin, like you said, dissidents. This is what they told them. I'm going to read you out what she said. What we do, obviously, we can ask our Ukrainian, let's say our Ukrainian comrades, friends, for their assistance in planning. What do you think about this? Could you tell us if this is a plausible mission? Would it help Ukraine in this fight, or would it make things worse? They will say yes or no, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. So this is a kind of encouragement and help and aid. Does then Ukraine worry, Alina, that this may escalate, this help and encouragement and aid may make things worse, may exacerbate it, maybe bring NATO allies in direct conflict with Russia here?
I don't understand how it can bring the NATO allies in direct conflict with Russia, because there is no any connection to
if
NATO.
only, Alina, only if they were using weaponry that's been provided by NATO allies, which has been a concern, of course.
But they are not using. We saw a few pictures which were produced by Russians about the vehicles, so-called vehicles, which were used. But then if you analyze this photo, which was done immediately by many analysts, it's obviously that this is staged photos, because these tracks were brought there artificially.
Our correspondent, Alina, very quickly, our correspondent Sam Kiley in this report speaks to these two groups, and they say they've got Humvees, they've got US weaponry, but they say they bought that on an open market, and that's a big question mark. So that's but you understand the concern then. What are the risks for Ukraine here? Do you see any risks with these attacks across the border?
No, we don't see risks, because we are under constant shelling and missiles shelling, and we are in war. This is the escalation. I mean, this is the top of escalation, which could be. We have hundreds of thousands of people suffered. We have millions of IDPs and refugees. So what kind of escalation we can have more? Tactical new weapons? Okay, so, it won't change the course of war. Even tactical nuclear weapons. Ukrainians, 86% in accordance with the latest poll, says that even in case of usage of tactical nuclear weapons, we are not in negotiating position. We continue to fight. So this is the decision of Ukrainian nation, and we don't see it as a threat. We don't afraid it, actually.
And I wonder, whether Ukraine is involved or not, and Ukraine says it isn't directly involved. Suspect it's a win in many ways, because it's destabilizing, would you say, the Russian government?
Of course, that's destabilizing, because actually what we see from here, that Russia was never planning to defend itself, and they actually don't have the capabilities to defend themselves. And for them, this is great surprise that they absolutely not protected. They always were planning only attacking capabilities. But when we come to defending their territory, they're not ready. And everyone, just like a very simple subversion group, can do whatever they wish on the territory of Russia. And for them, this is destabilizing and desacralization of power which they have. And they can it can lead to long-range circumstances for Putin and for his people around him.